Compared to the 60s, 70s, and 80s, fewer people are getting married and more people are getting divorced. While this is happening for a number of different reasons, it's led to something that we've never seen before in young people. More young people are single today than they've ever been, and they're happy being single. In this video, I'll discuss how we discovered this and why I think this is happening. I'm Harris, and I break down the interesting research in psychology, and this is the psychology of being single in 2024. A new paper published in June of 2024 wanted to find out how satisfied different age groups were in their singlehood and in life in general. This research came about as a result of a few different trends in society, especially in the West, including declining marriage rates and increasing divorce rates. It is important to note that compared to being in a romantic relationship, being single is still viewed as less favorably. What this means is that all else being equal, people still think being in a romantic relationship is better than being single. But this paper argues that we might be closing the gap between the satisfaction of being in a relationship versus the satisfaction of being single. The study was done in a pretty interesting way. The researchers gathered a large pool of data from people at different age groups at different points in time. Essentially, they followed the same group of people with consent over their life and collected data on a bunch of different things, including how satisfied they were in their life, being single, being in a relationship. And more specifically, this study collected data from people from 4 different age groups, including people who were born in the early 70s, early 80s, early 90s, and early 2000s. Now, if you allow me to get into the weeds just a little bit, this research study design is pretty fascinating because these researchers are combining age groups in interesting ways, 2 ways to be specific. First, they're looking at the same age range at different eras, being a teenager in your mid-2010s, in your early 2000s, in your early 90s, etc. But they're also comparing different eras in general. So essentially, someone who's born in their 70s, 80s, or 90s, how different were they when they were teens or in their 20s or in their 30s? Okay, cool. Now back out of the weeds and into the study. The researchers wanted to measure a few things. First, they asked participants how satisfied they were in their singlehoodness. Of course, they only asked people who were single in the study. They asked people how satisfied they were in general in life. They also collected some other information on personality characteristics like how extroverted or introverted they were, or how emotionally stable they were or were not. And this is what they found. First, teens born in the early 2000s range are more likely to be single than any other age range. And this is directly related to teens in the early 2000s having a higher level of satisfaction with their singlehoodness than the teens in their 90s or before. But interestingly, there was actually no difference in general life satisfaction or relationship satisfaction between any of the born eras, i.e. 90s, 80s, 70s, 2000s, or the age groups, i.e. teens, mid-20s, or mid-30s. So this means that something has happened that specifically targeted teens who were born in the 2000s and their satisfaction with being single. We'll get to that soon. There was actually no difference between people in their 20s or 30s in any era and their relationship satisfaction, their overall life satisfaction, and their satisfaction in their singlehoodness. That is a word now. The difference has only emerged in singlehood satisfaction and only for the cohort born in the 2000s. So what does this all mean? The teenagers and young people of today are more likely to be more single and happily single than people in their 20s and 30s right now, as well as young people and teenagers of the 90s, 80s, and 70s. But here is the golden question. Why is this going on? There's a few different reasons, and I think the first one, or the most obvious one, is social media. Social media came around in the mid-2000s, and there's a lot of research to show the effects that it's had on teenagers, and specifically the negative effects it's had. We know that teenagers are more susceptible to social influence than other age groups. As you get older, you get more solidified in who you are and yourself as a human and your identity, and you're less susceptible to social influence. You still are, but less so. I personally think that there's a lot of pressure to be perceived in a successful way on social media and to get your shit together. And maybe that's contributed to people focusing on their personal success as individuals instead of relational success. And with that, there might be a greater acceptance in general of being single. And if there's more of an acceptance around your cohort, around the people you're around with being single, then it's less likely that you're going to get into a relationship when most of your friends are single as well. With that, with young people, teenagers specifically, that social influence of all your friends remaining single, focusing on themselves, and avoiding the cluster of relationships, that could have a big impact on why teenagers specifically are now not avoiding relationships, but embracing singlehoodness. Another reason, I think, it's dating apps. So dating apps have changed the dating game, and there's a pretty negative perception of dating apps, especially with younger people. And with that negative perception, I think younger people are avoiding using dating apps for as long as they can, which I completely understand, to be honest. But that doesn't mean it's easier to meet people nowadays. In fact, it hasn't been harder to meet people naturally now than ever before. Combine that with the negative perception that young people have of dating apps, appropriately so, and young people are more likely to be accepting of the fact that they're more likely to be single because they don't want to use dating apps, and it's harder to meet people in general in real life. So when you accept something, you're more likely to be okay and more satisfied with that thing. In general, there is a change in societal expectations of getting in relationships and getting married. I think there's been a shift, and I've definitely noticed that, at least compared to when I was younger people now get asked less about their relationship status, which, in a sense, I'm like kind of jealous because that can get extremely annoying. Extremely annoying. We've all been there when you go to a family gathering and your uncle and auntie or grandma is like, when are we going to meet so and so? And I'm like, and that just, So in that sense, I'm kind of envious of young people who don't get asked that as much these days. And before we finish, there's a few things about the study that is important to address. First of all, the study was done on purely German participants. This might have some questions for how generalizable these findings are. How much can they relate to other countries in the West, let alone other countries in the East or other countries in other parts of the world? The study collected data from a pretty wide span of time, from the 70s to the 2000s. This still might not be long enough, and collecting data from even a longer period of time and collecting more data from now and another 10 years might reveal even more. Maybe this finding is just a glimpse in a bigger trend, but we won't know this until we get more information. But in any case, these are the findings. Young people are more likely to be single and more satisfied with their singleness than anyone else ever before or now. Take that with how you will. I hope you enjoyed this. There's more videos you can watch here, and here. And until next time, I'm Harris, and I'm out of here. Peace.